3. Early expansions of the Adamites. The violet race retained the Edenic traditions of peacefulness for many millenniums, which explains their long delay in making territorial conquests. When they suffered from population pressure, instead of making war to secure more territory, they sent forth their excess inhabitants as teachers to the other races. The cultural effect of these earlier migrations was not enduring, but the absorption of the Adamite teachers, traders, and explorers was biologically invigorating to the surrounding peoples. Some of the Adamites early journeyed westward to the valley of the Nile. Others penetrated eastward into Asia, but these were a minority. The mass movement of the later days was extensively northward and thence westward. It was in the main a gradual but unremitting northward push, the great number making their way north and then circling westward around the Caspian Sea into Europe. About 25,000 years ago, many of the purer elements of the Adamites were well on their northern trek, and as they penetrated northward, they became less and less Adamic until by the times of their occupation of Turkestan, they had become thoroughly admixed with the other races, particularly the Nodites. Very few of the pure-line violet peoples ever penetrated far into Europe or Asia. From about 30,000 to 10,000 BC, epoch-making racial mixtures were taking place throughout southwestern Asia. The highland inhabitants of Turkestan were a virile and vigorous people. To the northwest of India, much of the culture of the days of Van persisted. Still to the north of these settlements, the best of the early Andinites had been preserved, and both of these superior races of culture and character were absorbed by the northward-moving Adamites. This amalgamation led to the adoption of many new ideas. It facilitated the progress of civilization and greatly advanced all phases of art, science, and social culture. As the period of the early Adamic migrations ended, about 15,000 BC, there were already more descendants of Adam in Europe and Central Asia than anywhere else in the world, even than in Mesopotamia. The European blue races had been largely infiltrated. The lands now called Russia and Turkestan were occupied throughout their southern stretches by a great reservoir of the Adamites mixed with Nodites, Andinites, and red and yellow Sangics. Southern Europe and the Mediterranean fringe were occupied by a mixed race of Andinite and Sangic peoples, orange, green, and indigo, with a sprinkling of the Adamite stock. Asia Minor and the Central Eastern European lands were held by tribes that were predominantly Andinite. A blended colored race, about this time greatly reinforced by arrivals from Mesopotamia, held forth in Egypt and prepared to take over the disappearing culture of the Euphrates Valley. The black peoples were moving farther south in Africa and, like the red race, were virtually isolated. The Saharan civilization had been disrupted by drought, and that of the Mediterranean basin by flood. The blue races had, as yet, failed to develop an advanced culture. The Andinites were still scattered over the Arctic and Central Asian regions. The green and orange races had been exterminated as such. The indigo race was moving south in Africa, there to begin its slow but long-continued racial deterioration. The peoples of India lay stagnant, with a civilization that was unprogressing. The yellow man was consolidating his holdings in Central Asia. The brown man had not yet begun his civilization on the nearby islands of the Pacific. These racial distributions, associated with extensive climatic changes, set the world stage for the inauguration of the Andite era of Urantia civilization. These early migrations extended over a period of 10,000 years, from 25,000 to 15,000 BC. The later, or Andite migrations, extended from about 15,000 to 6,000 BC. It took so long for the earlier waves of Adamites to pass over Eurasia that their culture was largely lost in transit. Only the later Andites moved with sufficient speed to retain the Edenic culture at any great distance from Mesopotamia.